How's it going, everyone? David from dodmedia. In the start of 2020, I was looking at upgrading my motion slider system from the 2D motorized slider that I reviewed previously. It's the GVM80QD, which features that track and pan rod in the middle. Now, I stand by that is a great, inexpensive way of getting your feet wet with a motion slider system, but I was starting to want more control over the different features of the slider, and I wanted to be able to add tilt to it as well, which the 80QD did not do. So I started looking at more advanced, way more expensive 3D motion slider systems, meaning slider system that can slide back and forth, but that can also pan and tilt with far more control and precision over the start and end points and the degrees of rotation and tilt. Now, I won't bore you with the umming and ahhing that I experienced just doing a ton of research between a dozen different motion slider systems and the hours and hours of YouTube reviews that I watched, especially, for my needs. It came down to two options, really. The first option was the Edelkrone slider system with the Head Plus. Now, this is a very popular slider system. I know there are a large number of content creators who use it. And I used to use Edelkrone's first gen slider 1. So I know that Edelkrone's quality is top notch, but so is their price tag. Even with a 15% bundle discount, I'd be looking at about $3,000 to get the bundle that I wanted, which is not even the most expensive one. Now, given that that's 1,000% more than what I paid for the GVM80QD, I was a little reluctant. So then the next option down was the Rhino Arc II system, which I'd also heard great things about. And, Caleb Pike from DSLR Video Shooter did a great review on it. Gerald Undone did a fantastic comparison between the Arc II and that Edelkrone system. And ultimately that ended up playing a large factor in why I chose to go with Rhino over Edelkrone. So in terms of my decisions for parts to get, I decided to go for the 42-inch slider because I found that the 24-inch, I've had a 24-inch slider before and it's always felt a little bit short for me. For interviews, for product stuff, I don't have to use all 42 inches, but it's nice to have the option. So I got the 42-inch version, and then I got the high-speed motor, not the high-torque motor. The high-speed motor is really designed for interviews and talking heads because it operates quietly, whereas the high-torque motor is more for time-lapse and feature movements where absolute silence is not necessary. So that's why I went for the high-speed motor. And then finally, the Arc II head, which kind of acts as the brains of the entire thing. Now, I'm just going to say this straight up because this video will otherwise seem rather negative. This is an incredible system. I have never used something as advanced and as cool as this. It is really awesome. But this video is about some of the shortcomings, some of the things that it boasts on paper, but actually it doesn't quite deliver on in reality. So I just want to preempt the next 10 minutes of this video by saying this is not a video meant to trash talk the Arc II or Rhino as a company, as a brand. It's a fantastic system and it is unparalleled for its price. It allows me to make some fantastic movements, camera movements that otherwise, without this system, I would really struggle to do. I don't know how I would do them. But there are some definite things about it that I hadn't known or thought of when I decided to buy it, which now, if I were looking back at buying this kind of system again after half a year, some of these things might give me pause. The biggest one of these is the battery. Now, the idea behind having an inbuilt battery, I get it. It's to minimize the amount of kit you need to take with you. You don't have to worry about, forgetting to charge your batteries because you just have to remember to charge this whole unit and it will power your whole slider. I get that, and it's designed as a travel slider. So yeah, I get the inbuilt battery, but the problem I have with that is that there's no way for me to change that battery, which means that ultimately I have a limited lifespan with this unit before the cells become so terrible at holding charge that they won't even hold the charge for one interview. And yes, you can power it with AC/DC adapter, but that's kind of not the point of having a battery-powered unit, is it? And I've already noticed that the battery doesn't charge to 100% anymore. I got this in January, February. It doesn't charge to 100% anymore. It blinks at about 90% and doesn't go beyond that. So how long it will last in totality, that's anyone's guess. The other thing is that it's a 60 watt hour battery, which isn't anything to be sniffed at, sure. But for context, this is a 75.6 watt hour, 7.2 volt battery. It cost me 60 quid. Combine two of these and you would have enough voltage to power this unit and plenty of watt hours, plenty of wattage anyway, to power it for at least twice as long as a full charge of this normally would, for 120 quid of batteries. So I would love to see someone take this apart actually and remove the battery cells and replace it with some kind of power plate that you can put two of those NPF style batteries on and see, just see how much better it operates, because that would give far more longevity to this if you have batteries that can be replaceable. For such an expensive piece of kit, I kind of feel like that would be a very nice feature to add. The other thing that gives me pause is the speed at which Rhino develops its firmware. Now, there are features on the app that have said coming soon since the product launched. There's still no hint of those even becoming available. When they might become available, no one knows. There are lots and lots of promises and very few of them have been delivered on. So it's just not able to do everything that it says on paper yet, and it's been out for a year already. And that causes some concern for me. Now, saying that, Rhino have just released a new firmware for it a few months ago, version 1.05. And I believe Kyle from Rhino said in that video announcement that they now had a firmware team dedicated to working on the firmware of this unit. So it's not just a tiny group of people, Rhino is a tiny company. It's not just that tiny group of people anymore. They have a team of people dedicated to working on the firmware, but still, until it actually gets delivered, there's no promise, right? There's no fulfillment of that promise. So unreliability as far as product feature development goes, that's a big issue for me. And the third thing that I've got to say I really dislike about the slider, or the head specifically, is that the 501 mounting plate is not centered over the head's axis of rotation, which is here in the center of the caddy. This means if you use a tripod plate the way you're meant to, the way that 99% of people do, your camera sensor isn't going to be above the center of rotation of the slider caddy. Now, to me, that's not only a weight dispersion issue, but it's also an alignment issue when it comes to distance between start and end points of movement. Let me show you what I mean with this animation. This is the slider with the Arc II set up on top, and a camera mounted to that using the mounting thread where it's typically found on a camera, which is in line with the lens. Now, if the camera is pointing out while the slider moves, and the Arc II doesn't rotate, it's not a problem. But if you decide to rotate your Arc 90 degrees, like so, well, suddenly the camera doesn't sit directly above the slider. It's slightly offset, which means the weight offset is to the left of the Arc II. Now, this probably, hopefully, won't affect your shoot in any way, but if you're using a heavier camera system, you may well find that it does, and it's going to add unnecessary weight and balance offset to the head, and it's going to make the motors work harder. Okay, so now let's imagine that I'm doing a tracking shot where my subject is stationary. So for example, an interview talking head situation. I set up my keyframes, start and finish, and now when the movement is happening, I can see that the sensor is physically closer when it's on the left of the slider than when it's on the right. Again, this is not something you should notice, hopefully, but I suspect if you're doing some macro work with a probe lens, you might need to actually change the rotation of the slider a little bit to compensate for that. And you'd have to eyeball it, which kind of gets rid of the whole point of being able to do these precise movements if you then have to eyeball stuff. But like I say, it's probably not even something that you would affect most users. But to me, it's a short sight in the design process that I just find a little bit disappointing. I mean, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's a reason why it's like this, but I can't think of any. And the only thing I can think of is that it's offset to be able to give access to these controls, which is really not all that clever, because the controls could have been built on the side and have the 501 plate where it's meant to be. And then the final thing that drives me a little bit nuts is that app control is currently available only for iOS, which means that Android users like myself, tough luck. Development for an Android version seems way down their priority list. I mean, so far down that I've not seen an update on it since this has come out. Now, I'm not holding out any hope for it either, because they've really put a lot of focus on their iOS app. And I do find that a lot of companies, tech companies, their iOS apps work really well, better than the Android versions usually. So I've actually repurposed my wife's old iPhone 6S and turned it exclusively into a Studio Gear control tool. But it would be nice to not have to buy another device or use another device to control your gear. It'd be nice to use the one that you have that has an internet connection, that has data, that has all of your stuff on it. It just makes sense. So like I said, those are the things that I'm not so hot on about this slider system. But now let's have a look at what I do feel made this the right choice for me. The movements are buttery smooth. There's no other way to say it. I mean, that's why you use a slider, right? To get buttery smooth movements. I'd read and seen accounts online about micro jitters, not just for Rhino. Actually, Edelkrone has more people complaining about micro jitters than Rhino does. And I don't know if it's flaws in their gear or if they're not balancing their cameras properly. But for my part, I've not had any micro jitters whatsoever. I'm not using an overly heavy cinema rig, but even actually using my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K with the big fat chunky Sigma 14 to 24 zoom lens, I don't notice any jittering whatsoever. And the only way to kind of prove that to you is to show you. So here is a little montage of clips from around the studio to show you just how smooth this is. Now, another factor that made me favor this one over the Edelkrone system was cost. As I said in the beginning, the Edelkrone would cost around $3,200 after tax, whereas the Arc II cost me about $2,200. I mean, that's $1,000. that's almost 50% more. And now, considering like the battery issue and all of that, it is the age-old dilemma of capital versus long-term payoff. I don't know if in 3 years I'd be saying that I'd recommend this over the Edelkrone if the battery's crapped out. There's no way to say, but I think for that 50% extra savings, I'm willing to chance it. Hopefully I won't regret it in a few years. Hey, Editor David here, just jumping in because I realized that I kind of skirted over a lot of the stuff that's actually really good that I enjoy about this slider. I kind of got focused on the negative. And there are a few things that I forgot to mention when recording that video initially that, to me, make this a much better slider than the Edelkrone. The first thing is these little wing nuts here that you use to mount it to a tripod. And the fact that you've got a central one, which you can turn and secure it down, or you've also got two on the sides here, That to me is a massive, massive benefit because it means really, really good, easy to access stability for when you're mounting this slider, either centrally on one tripod with a little extension arm down the end like I've done here, or if you're mounting it on two tripods in either of these further out kind of 2/3 attachments with the wing nuts. The fact that they've included those wing nuts on both sides there as well, really, really nice touch. But then if you want to attach it all the way at the ends, you can as well, because it has a 3/8 and 1/4-20 thread underneath there on both sides. So you could use a light stand or like I've got this kind of extension arm with a clamp on the end that extends out. And it's really good then if you're just using one central tripod to then use both of these arms or just even one arm to brace it against the floor. It makes a big difference. And another factor that made me choose this slider over the Edelkrone, where it has this system that allows you to extend beyond that length of the slider as it is. The problem there is you'd have to lie your tripod legs down as flat as they can go really, or almost as flat as they can go to get that added reach on the legs for stability. And you're still gonna get a little bit of bowing when the camera is at either end, which some people say it doesn't bother them. I mean, I don't know how it can't bother you. It bothers me. And the final thing that I wanted to add that I really like about this is that it's a toolless system, meaning that apart from the somewhat cheesy, unnecessary beer opener that they've included underneath the 501 plate mount, you can mount the motor with the thumb screws, you can mount tripods or light stands using these wing nuts. You don't need any tools to assemble this slider, which is really nice when you're out in the field. Now, I mentioned this is a little cheesy. This is used basically to really secure this down after you've used the auto mount system that's in the Arc II. You secure it down, wedging this as a lever, or a lever, however you want to pronounce that. Personally, I kind of feel like they could have used just like an Allen key that pulls out and you turn that and then you push it back in, and that way you never lose it. But they wanted to have a beer opener in there. I'm sure there are people who are delighted that they can open a beer now that they have bought this expensive slider. I'm not one of them, but my point is that it is a toolless system, which is really good. Okay, I want to hear the rest of what he had to say. So the big question is it still worth buying a Rhino Arc II system in 2020? I would say that if what I've discussed as cons in this video don't concern you, or that you're willing to live with those points of concern that I raised, well then it's a fantastic piece of kit that you will love using and that you will get some phenomenal footage from. However, if it's not something that you can let slide, no pun intended, if it's not something that you can let slide, then I would suggest looking at something like the Edelkrone system, even though it's more expensive, or check out Axio.com. They're going to be going on Kickstarter soon, and that's a pretty ambitious looking modular system for 3D camera movements that I'm definitely going to enjoy checking out once it's live. So yeah, check that out. If after watching this you have decided that you would like the Arc II system, then you could consider buying it using the link in the description. It's an affiliate link, so it won't cost you anything extra, but it will give me a little cut of that sale so that you can help support this channel to make more gear reviews for filmmakers and photographers. Keep it going. All right, give it a thumbs up if you liked what you saw, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.